Well, you can put it any way, which way you like, but the fact remains Russia's invasion of Ukraine violates international law. Well, that's the position of UCT public law expert Cathy Powell, who's also an expert in international law. Well, she says that the government was asked to play a mediating role in the war, but Powell reckons government's stance seems to suggest that both Russia and Ukraine need to make concessions. But do they? She's live with us now. Cathy Powell, thank you so much for joining us. You've written an article saying that Russia is clearly violating international law. My question to you is, as part of the United Nations, Russia, that is part of the United Nations, they're not on the permanent seat of the Security Council at the moment, I don't think. Who decides whether international law is being violated or not?
Okay, well, a couple of things. First of all, Russia does have a permanent seat and the veto power on the Security Council. It took over the seat that the USSR had held under the Soviet Union. Secondly, who decides? We don't have one authoritative body in international law the way we do have in a domestic system like the Constitutional Court. So areas of law can remain open and in contention for some time. But the particular thing we're dealing with now, which is the use of force by states, this is a no-brainer. There is no question that a state may not use force against another state unless certain very narrow exceptions are met, and those exceptions have not been met here. So any legal scholar can sit down and show you why Russia's act of crossing the border and firing on targets in Ukraine is illegal.
Cathy, as a permanent member state, and my apologies for not getting that right, as a permanent member state, they would probably argue, I presume, that they are only protecting themselves and that they are not doing any kind of invasion as an act of aggression, but one of protection.
Well, by doing so, they're claiming that they're acting in self-defense. But international law sets very strict requirements for a lawful act of self-defense. And one of them is that you have to be responding to an armed attack. Now, Ukraine has not attacked Russia. The requirements for an armed attack are not only that they be with arms, so using force, but that they be of a particular level of severity. So a mere frontier incident, for example, wouldn't count. And this is something that has been confirmed by the International Court of Justice, which is probably the best single authority we're going to find. So until Ukraine attacks Russia, Russia has no right to use force against Ukraine. It doesn't matter how threatened it feels. It can use other forms. And remember, it is a permanent member on the Security Council. It can use other forms of negotiation to try resolve its grievances. And quite frankly, even if its grievances don't get resolved, it may not attack Ukraine, not unless Ukraine attacks it first.
You know, President Ramaphosa has expressed concern, which seems rather underplayed, at the bombing of civilians, and says that Vladimir Putin appreciates South Africa's balanced approach, that it's a conflict that requires both sides to make concessions. There could be a possible role as mediator in this conflict. Is it too late for that? And is this just, you know, pie in the sky talk?
I find Ramaphosa's formulation and Dirko's formulation of the suggested way forward extremely worrying, because there is buried, not very subtly in all of this talk, the idea that Ukraine should have to make concessions to get Russia to withdraw. And that is poison, because it suggests that Ukraine has to somehow earn Russia's not attacking Ukraine. Now, it's the bedrock of international law since the UN was set up, since the end of World War II, that states may not use force against each other. There is nothing that Ukraine should have to do to stop that from happening. Sure, they can negotiate about issues between them, but none of those issues should be held hostage by the fact that Russia currently has all its military forces in Ukraine. So what worries me in the way that President Ramaphosa and Dirko are talking about this issue is that they're treating the two sides as morally equivalent. And they have not once acknowledged that Russia is in fact breaking a very cardinal rule of international law by being in Ukraine in the first place.
And as far as I know, International Affairs or Ramaphosa has not spoken publicly to Ukrainian government, so it would seem a little bit one-sided. A very quick last question, because we're running out of time. What are the consequences for violating international law?
The consequences have to be meted out by the international community. And they usually are. It is what makes international law move fairly slowly, but it does move. So what has to happen is that all the states of the world have to respond. Ideally, let me acknowledge, it's the Security Council that is meant to respond to an act of aggression like this. Unfortunately, because Russia is a permanent member on the Council and has a veto power, the Security Council is not going to be able to respond to Russia's invasion. This is not going to be able to produce a resolution doing anything about Russia's invasion. So the burden then moves to the General Assembly and to the states of the world. It's up to us to actually respond to Russia's aggression and draw a line. And what's problematic in South Africa's response is that it has not done so.